Hello, listeners! We are absolutely chuffed you've decided to join us. Grab a packet of biscuits, brew a warm cuppa, and curl up for a wholesome American conversation about quintessential British food from everyone's favourite baking competition. Please enjoy Hats Off to Bake Off, an amateur baking podcast.
Hello and welcome to Hats Off to Bake Off, an amateur baking podcast. My name is Nick and I'm here with my friend Malory, and as always, we'll be talking about the signature, the technical, and the showstopper of episode 1 of collection 3 or series 6 of the Great British Baking Show, or the Great British Bake Off as they call it across the pond. We've made it through one season and we're into our quote-unquote second season. If you're following along, this is collection 3 on Netflix, which is super confusing and weird because they just mix them all up on us halfway through our podcast. But this is series 6, so if you are watching along with Alvin, Durrett, Flora, Ian, Marie, Matt, Nadia, Paul, Sandy, Stu, Tamal, and Ugne, you are in the right place. If you're for some reason watching collection 2, I'm sorry, that is going to be one of our much later seasons, but Netflix is weird, so there's that. We'll be talking about our versions of the different bakes that we either made or we would consider making, and Mallory's going to teach us about different types of sponge and what they mean and how you make them and what they're good for, so I'm excited about that. We're in a new season of Bake Off. We've got a whole new collection of bakers. What do you think about this group?
I do love this group. This group has some of my favorite personalities in all of the seasons. It is always a little bit strange to go from the final where you've got 3 bakers that you know really well because you've watched them bake week after week after week. And then you're introduced to a bunch of fresh faces and you sort of have to figure out and get to know them just in one episode. But it's always really enjoyable. And I know we are both obsessed with Nadia, like head over heels. So I can't wait to just talk about
Episode 10,
her.
we're going to talk all about my poster.
Yeah.
Because it makes me cry every time I read it, which is something weird to be put right next to your bed.
Just a Nadia quote. I love that we're really living this lifestyle. It's not just a podcast.
Yeah. I've gone full deep dive into Bake Off. But also, we were just talking about this before the podcast started. This season has Sandy, not the host Sandy, but Sandy the baker.
Sandy.
Who is, she's great. I love her to pieces.
I love her.
She's so weird, and I just truly appreciate that.
Her attitude is just so wonderful going into this because she is not afraid of it. She's clearly not. She's maybe under a little bit of tension, but you don't really sense that. She's just
she's
here
got it.
to she's cracking
Doesn't matter
jokes.
what happens.
She's smiling. Her whole demeanor is just so wonderful and refreshing, and I am absolutely in love.
They have this great cut right in the middle when Sandy says, I start making a cake and I end up with a meat pie. And you're like, what's going on in that head, Sandy? What are you doing?
And then also Tamal.
Oh, Tamal's pretty great.
Flora, Marie, Paul, and Paul. Every single morning we get to hear them say, hi, Paul. Good morning, Paul. Good morning, Paul. That's my favorite part of the season. I'm so excited.
They're such lovely people.
I'm so excited. I know we say that every time, but it's really true.
It's so true. Flora is very similar in my brain to Martha. They're both really young bakers, and they're both lovely people in general. So,
and really just have a handle on it. Flora also is just knows exactly what to do and how to make it both really presentable and also taste great, which is very impressive.
She has a few oh no moments, but other than that, she's pretty on top of things.
Yeah. So the first bake that they handled in the tent, this first challenge, the signature was to make a Madeira cake.
We know Madeira cakes.
We do know Madeira cakes, and that's because for the first episode of our first season, I sort of took on the mini classic British cake showstopper challenge with an interpretation on Madeira. So I got a little bit familiar with them then, and it was really fun this time to see our bakers dedicate an entire challenge to a classic Madeira. And what did we learn?
You've told me this on a couple of occasions that basically a Madeira is just a pound cake, but with citrus in it, which is interesting. We also learned that there's no Madeira in a Madeira cake. It's meant to be served alongside the Madeira. And I learned from making it that it's a really freaking delicious cake.
Very tasty. Would highly recommend. Did you have any favorites among the bakers? I feel like usually I have like 1 or 2 favorites, and I have like 6 this time.
That's valid. I need to say this. I'm calling that your favorites are going to include Nadia's and Flora's, and I am correct according to your list.
Yes.
I'm calling you out on your love of blood orange and cardamom, but also that's because that's exactly what you made last time.
Yeah, I did blood orange Madeiras, and then I did a cardamom glaze, and it was really funny. I'd forgotten that those were because we made this last season, so I hadn't rewatched the season yet. And then I was like, as they were presenting their recipe ideas, I was like, oh, I called out both of them.
Well,
yeah,
I'm kind of addicted to. This is gonna sound so basic. I'm addicted to orange vanilla Coke. And so that's kind of opened my world to the idea of orange. And so I think the idea of the orange vanilla... I love how that's
your introduction to the world of orange. I am.
I'm allergic to oranges in general, so I have to start with like artificial flavorings, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
I don't eat oranges, but I made an orange and chocolate Madeira cake, which we'll get into. But that was my first like citrus cake that I actually really enjoyed. So I was gonna say I like Alvin's idea of the orange and vanilla. They really pull him down on his idea of like full figs in a Madeira cake.
Yeah, listen, I think I think Alvin is a bit of a sloppy baker, which we see as he as we go throughout the season.
I'm glad you said it and not me, because I also agree.
Yeah, I think his like concepts are really good, and like consistently his flavor is really good. But like I would have just like maybe if I really wanted full figs in there, would have placed them neatly sort of like on top in a ring, almost sort of like you would for tart, so that maybe then at least they'd be a little bit more evenly dispersed.
There we go. Love it.
Bits of fig on the bottom.
I should also mention that I think while I don't like the flavor of lime, the idea of the chocolate and lime Madeira cake is basically what I was going for. I made a chocolate and orange Madeira cake that I tried my best to marble. It turned out very lovely and had lots of orange flavor. The judges were not very fond of the chocolate Madeira cake. I think they went as far as to say it's not really a Madeira cake, but I think it's actually probably a good idea. And honestly, chocolate and lime is one of Paul's favorite flavors, so the fact that he didn't like it is shocking.
Yeah. I think it really is just about like Madeira is traditionally citrus, and any deviation from that, like I'm not in tune enough with that culture to understand how much of a transgression that is. But it sounds innovative and yummy. But yeah, I don't know if then it just becomes a chocolate pound cake or not, technically. I don't know.
So what were your favorites other than the obvious ones?
Other than the obvious ones, I also really liked Sandy's idea for an apricot and almond Madeira. I thought that sounded great. And almond flour is a pretty traditional add-in to many different sponge mixes, including Madeira. And then Paul's lemon, ginger, and caraway Madeira. I know that the flavors didn't come through the way that he wanted, but that concept sounded really, really good. And then Tamal's pistachio and rose sounded really tasty as well. And I'm always kind of a sucker for that combo whenever I hear one of the bakers try it. So that sounded like a really great way to sort of elevate the lightness and really delicate flavor that tends to come along with a Madeira and take it in a more floral route.
I think that's pretty cool.
Having now made your chocolate orange Madeira, is this one that you would do again?
Definitely something I would make again. Mostly because I bought, I think, 12 oranges, because for some reason I was convinced I would need a lot of oranges, and I used like 2 of them. And then I came home and my roommate was like, oh, I got these oranges for free if anyone wants to have them. And I was like, oh, gosh, darn it. But I am definitely going to have to make some more chocolate orange Madeira cake, because my coworkers ate like half of my cake today. So they're fans. I did want to try one that was a bit of an untraditional recipe that included oil that made the cake supposedly lighter. Mm-hmm. So I want to try that at some point, just see how it goes. But I was a big fan of it, actually. It's very, as Mary says, it's a very close textured cake. So it's not light and airy like most cakes would be, but it's kind of good that way. I kind of liked that it was like a dense cake, which sounds so weird.
Yeah, I like a good pound cake. It just like has its own purpose, I guess, is maybe a good way of putting it.
What I thought was interesting here was that the judges really preferred the traditional cakes. They didn't go for any of the weirder cakes.
Yeah, and I think that kind of makes sense for this first challenge, because we are getting to know a bunch of different bakers, I think it's probably easier for them to understand how well they're executing this challenge if it's something that they're familiar with, especially flavors that they're familiar with. That's my theory.
That makes sense. I mean, the idea was to make a traditional Madeira cake. They wanted the crack, they wanted the citrus. I think it's interesting that for most of the rest of the bake, they want something really new and untraditional, but this was like they wanted something that was just excellent from the get-go.
Yeah. And then it was really interesting watching them transition. So we had the Madeira cake as the signature challenge. Very like no frills, classic. It's just a cake maybe with some candied peel or powdered sugar on top, to then moving into the technical challenge, which was the walnut cake, which is a little bit more complicating, using nuts in the sponge, having to do a buttercream, covering it in this sort of boiled meringue frosting, making caramel. It was just like, that was sort of an interesting transition into like cakes can be so many different things, and they can be really simple like a Madeira, or they can have more fills to it like a walnut cake or later a Black Forest Gateau as well.
I think that's a good explanation. That kind of went up like started low and a little high and then got like really intense by the showstopper. I do have to say that the walnut cake, that's Mary and Sue, wow, that Sue and Jesus, what are their names?
Mel?
It's only been a month. Mel and Sue say that the walnut cake is a super British, like really traditional cake, which is funny because I feel like most of the bakers either hadn't ever made it, or, you know, I've never heard of that as a traditional British bake, but they like market it that way, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I had never really heard of it or tried it, but it's one that like looks really good now watching them. I'm getting more and more comfortable using walnuts. I feel like after especially the Pobatiza challenge, I get it. I understand the flavor profile and how to use them well, and I think that this would be the perfect vehicle for them. Oh my goodness. And I love ground nuts in a sponge. I think it adds this really nutty flavor. You do get kind of the moistness from the oils in the nuts. You're still getting moistness not just from the butter and the fats that you're adding, but also from the nuts themselves. And then just the texture is so wonderful. I'm sorry, Nick.
I can't relate.
I know. I'm like, every time I talk about how delicious fresh fruits and nuts are, I'm like, sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's why I was like, there's a very obvious reason I'm not making this cake this particular episode, because that'd just be really sad for me.
Here's this beautiful cake, and now it will sit, and I will not eat it.
But you're right, the frosting looks so phenomenal. I've gotten really into Swiss meringue buttercreams, which is kind of similar, actually very similar, and just that like soft shine that you get from the frosting that they make is so satisfying.
And I think the difference here is that this didn't have any. So there was a buttercream in the middle, and the frosting outside did not have any butter in it. It was pretty much just a meringue frosting.
I'm a fan of the kind of multi icings you can kind of put in a cake, whereas like some traditional like American cakes are just like the same buttercream all throughout.
All the way through.
But I kind of like the varied textures thing. So I do a lot of things that are just a cake with like whipped cream in the middle, because if you want to decorate it with a more interesting frosting, just having whipped cream is totally great. Even if it's unsweetened whipped cream, it's so much better than covering the whole thing in American buttercream.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I like that concept a lot. It was really interesting to see how many of the bakers struggled to get a really smooth texture on that icing, as well as somebody who's made meringue for
the Doomed Baked Alaska.
The Doomed Baked Alaska and the successful, what the fuck is it called? Why am I like this?
You did a pavlova, but it wasn't for
pavlova. It was not for the podcast.
Okay. It wasn't for the podcast, but you did make this very, very pretty pavlova, which you can
pavlova.
check in our stories on Instagram.
Yeah, so somebody who's made a pavlova and made meringue for a pavlova, you sort of learn, it's like one of the first things I read about was that you need to almost like stick your fingers in and sort of like, you can rub a bit of the meringue between your fingers and you'll feel the graininess there. And I think every single one, except for maybe Ugnes, like, was grainy. And maybe even Ugnes too. Like,
Yeah, like, they just kept saying, this one's grainy, it tastes like sugar, which is wild. Between the meringue being grainy and the caramel just not working for so many of them, I was really surprised.
Yeah, I was too.
I'm going to knock on wood right now because I'm about to say that every time I've made caramel for this show, it's gone surprisingly well. So I was terrified going into this podcast because every time they do caramel, something goes awry. And every time I do caramel, I'm like waiting for something to go horribly, horribly wrong. It really hasn't so far. So let's hope.
You're using all of the caramel luck between the two of us. The only time I've had to make caramel for this podcast was for the Baked Alaska because I did a pineapple upside down cake. And so the caramel was sort of the base of the upside down cake. And I burnt it the first time because I get so stressed.
Oh no.
Caramel likes to be left alone, and I am not a leave aloner. So that was rough. But I will say, however, I think I've got you. We sort of flip flop because both times that I've tried tempering chocolate for this podcast, it has gone remarkably and very surprisingly well. And the one time you tried tempering chocolate for what were those that we made? It was like episode 2.
It was the biscuits. It was the
Florentines.
The Florentines, yes.
Yeah, when you tried tempering that chocolate, it didn't go to plan. So I don't know. Maybe you should do all the caramels. I'll do all the chocolate. It'll be fine.
I'm gonna miss the chocolate if you do all of the chocolate.
You're right.
Chocolate's very important to my everyday life.
I guess you're right. I can maybe work up the courage to do a caramel.
I mean, I'll teach you all I know about caramel, and you can teach me all you know about pastry. And chocolate tempering, evidently. I think that brings us to about the halfway mark. We're making remarkable time for our little time for tea moment. Do you have tea with you today?
I do. I am back to drinking tea because we have the air conditioning on. So I'm not dying. It's still very hot here. But I'm drinking a nice chamomile. Help me wind down for the evening. Very much enjoying it.
That's a very, very good idea. My AC is pumping very strong, and yet my room is still upsettingly hot. It's rather annoying. So
womp womp.
Womp womp. It is hot in Boston. Do you have any fans you want to shout out to? Any friends who've made some fun stuff lately?
No.
Oh, I have one. Thinking it's Cakes Week, and I keep forgetting to mention them. My friend Lex has made this a couple times. The first time did not go super well, but the second time they shared me a very exciting picture of a peanut butter and chocolate cake that they made. And having made the chocolate and peanut butter Dobus tort, I was quite proud of them because that sounds like a delicious cake. So hats off to you, Lex. You did a really good job making that cake.
Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah, I think that's all for now. Keep making cakes. Keep telling us what you're making. We can't wait to see what you've been doing. I know quarantine is not quite winding down, but like people have just been like, I guess I got to start going back to my real life and stop baking sourdough. Which is sad because you should always be baking sourdough.
You say that like you are baking. I need to call you out on your hypocrisy.
Yeah,
here.
no, that's 100% correct.
Nikki is
failed.
Not a sourdough baker. And I can't let this slide.
Oh, speaking of sourdough, though, because I just thought of this. This is a great time for us to announce something really cool that we'll be doing in mid-September.
Oh, yeah, this is a perfect time for tea.
This is a great time for tea
saying.
thing.
Okay.
I am a role player with a group called TPK Roleplay. They stream on Twitch and they send all their streamed videos to YouTube. They have a great Discord community and they do a lot of really cool stuff with tabletop role-playing games. And what we're going to be doing with them is their 1-year anniversary. They're making a TPK Con, basically. And we'll be joining them for their finale event on September 19th, from 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific time. So for us, that's 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can check out the stream on their channel, TPK Roleplay on Twitch. And we'll be doing one part, basically a podcast about baking in D&D, which is going to be very cool. We're going to be trying to either recreate dishes that you could find in Faerun, which is the fantasy world that is the D&D is set in. Also, we'll be doing a one-shot, which is like a 2-hour short little session of playing D&D in some kind of baking-inspired world. So I'm really excited about that. So excited to use our catchphrase, basically. And Malory's going to be joining me, and I'm going to be the DM, and she's going to be a player. So check that out. Actually, if you want, you can go to, I just made this fun little extension, go.hotbopod.com/TPK, and that'll bring you right to their Twitch stream. So join us at 1 p.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. Eastern time on Twitch.
September 19th.
Let's do it. So what do we want to talk about next?
So it's Cake Week, and last Cake Week, you sort of delved into the history of Swiss rolls. But I really do think that because this is such a foundational episode, Cake Week sort of launches us off into all of the other wonderful desserts that can be made, and also really serves as like a basic knowledge piece in baking in general. Like, I think it's very much like, if you cannot compete with these bakers baking cakes, like, that's it. So I really did want to dive into a little bit about sponges, what makes them work, what different kinds there are that you could use for different scenarios, just to sort of give you a better understanding of what your options are, and how to sort of make cakes less boring, you know?
I like not boring cakes.
I do too. And so this all started really because I was noticing, so Madeira cake, as you said, is pretty much a basic pound cake. So what is basically the method for bringing that dough together is just to cream together the butter and sugar. How did you do yours? So there's a little bit of difference. Once the creaming's done, there's some differences in like what's added next.
So when I was looking for a Madeira recipe, I was looking around. I was trying to do basically what you're going to tell us in a bit, but I was trying to find what makes a Madeira cake because, as you said, it just basically is a pound cake. And so what I was trying to look for, here we go. What I was looking for in a Madeira cake recipe was what I assumed was what made it a Madeira cake, was that pound cake was kind of equal parts flour and butter. And so I looked for one that was more flour than it was butter. And that's basically what I was going off of. But in my particular recipe, what they had to do was beat the butter, the sugar, and the lemon, or in my case, the orange together. And then add the eggs. And you had to gently fold in the flour mixture, which is like very different than a normal cake recipe, I feel. Because if you're folding, it's usually like egg whites. But for this, you normally just kind of like dump in flour 3 parts at a time or whatever. But this was, you had to gently fold the flour mixture, which I thought was different. What other things have you seen?
Yeah, so that's a really good sort of segue into, I can talk about why that's important. There's also, depending on how much chemical raising agent is used. So I'm assuming your recipe called for self-raising flour.
No, mine actually did have baking or all-purpose flour, but it did also ask for baking powder.
Perfect. Okay.
Did I
So
use
some
baking
will
powder?
ask for self-raising
Did I forget
flour.
baking powder?
Huh?
Might have forgot baking powder. Whoops.
Oh.
It still tasted good.
Okay, great. So even more important than that, you folded in the flour. So if you remember, I think it was episode 6 of the first season, I talked a little bit about leaveners and how they're used in different circumstances. You can technically make a cake with any of those 3 branches of leaveners: mechanical, chemical, and biological. Like we saw in that season 6, all of those yeast leaven cakes. That was a biological raising agent. They were using yeast, bacteria, to eat all the sugars, create carbon dioxide, which was then trapped by the protein structures that were made with the flour and the eggs, and that would raise the cake. Then we've got butter sponges or butter cakes, where the raising agent is pretty typically chemical in nature. You're not whipping anything like eggs that will create and hold bubbles, but you can add to the airiness by whipping together, and in what's called the creaming method, the butter and the sugar. And actually what that does, especially if you're using granulated sugar, the granulated sugar is sort of going to rip holes through your fat, like your butter. And then sometimes if you add your eggs, it's going to sort of like create some aeration, and it just...
You're using the sugar as an abrasive, basically.
Pretty much, exactly. And so that does create some small amount of aeration. And so then you would fold in the flours, and including your chemical raising agent, whatever it is, baking soda, baking powder. And then that would really, that chemical raising agent would be responsible for most of the rise, but the creaming would be responsible for a lot of that structure and adding to a bit of that airiness and sponginess to it.
So when you're making a cake recipe, I know that this is something that I learned actually fairly recently. Growing up, I didn't make a lot of fresh cakes. My parents were kind of a box cake family, but when I started making cakes from scratch, one of the things they tell you to really do is make sure you whip your butter really well.
Yeah.
Because some people will just kind of like mix it together, but you want to keep whipping it until it's very light and very frothy. So that makes sense. That's like you're adding to the airiness, lightness, the leavening of your cake, right?
Exactly. So you can actually watch that process happen as you're whipping your butter and your sugar together. You can watch the mixture become lighter in color, lighter in density, and just like grow in volume as well.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And then moving on from the butter.
Right. So that was our chemical raising agent. We had our biological raising agent earlier. Then we've got our mechanical raising agent. And so before chemical raising agents came into the picture, this was how most sponges were raised. And that's pretty much by whipping eggs. And depending on the type of sponge, it's either whole eggs or just egg whites. And then there are so many different varieties that sort of fall into this category of sponges. And sometimes those butter cakes that use the chemical raising agent aren't even called sponges. Sometimes to be a sponge cake, people like it has to be leavened with eggs pretty much for it to be referred to as a sponge, sometimes depending on the nomenclature.
That makes a lot of sense because they talk about them in the Great British Bake Off as if they're like their own separate thing. And for an American, that seems so weird because I'm just like, yeah, it's just a cake. But like, I guess there is a distinction. There is a quote unquote sponge cake versus like a pound cake. Like there's a distinction. But for me in my head, I was like, isn't that just any cake? But I guess there is a distinction being the egg leavening, right?
Yeah, and it's sort of in between. So like a Victoria sponge usually uses I think it can use a leavening agent. I need to make one. I know that's on both of our lists to try out.
Still haven't done it, which is shocking.
It'll happen eventually. That should be like our next bonus episode, dude. We can't keep putting it off like this.
Sounds good.
I think it's like the last technical in next season.
You've only got 20 episodes, listeners.
Yeah, not to give you too many spoilers, but I think it is coming eventually. We'll just have to both do that challenge.
They're already out. It's not a spoiler.
Okay, well, whatever.
But yeah, we'll get there eventually. Believe in us.
It's true. So anyways, you can really customize a lot of your flavor and your texture even within this category that is sponge cake. So inside this category, we've got a chiffon cake, which we know from when you used it to as the base for your sponge
Swiss
cake,
roll.
Swiss roll. I was like, what?
You got there.
So from when you used it as the base of your Swiss roll. And that is a sponge cake where you do separate the egg whites and whip those separately. So you're basically making a meringue. But then unlike an angel food cake, which is pretty much just egg whites, flour, sugar, salt. A chiffon also uses egg yolks, adds those in separately, and then also a significant amount of, usually traditionally, olive oil. I don't know if that was what you experienced in your recipe.
I do not think so, but I did experience a very beautifully soft, luscious cake.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yep. So oil is typically used in a chiffon. I'm pretty sure chiffon originated in the United States. And then you've sort of got a lot of these more like middling sponges that use whole egg. So that's a type that I use, and we'll talk about this in a second as well. That's a type of sponge I used to make my Black Forest Gateau. So I used a Genoese sponge, and to make a Genoese, you do this really weird thing. And actually, it was really interesting. All of these places that I was looking at online to compare these different sponge types, all of them said the Genoese was the most complicated. And y'all, really not. So easy. And really makes a perfect cake for any sort of layered cake or gâteau, because I think Genoese has the perfect middle ground of structure, but then also fat content. So to make a Genoese, you whisk together your eggs and your sugar, and there's a lot of eggs in here. So to make 3 8-inch cakes, I used 9 eggs.
Holy sweet Jesus.
Yep, and 300 grams of sugar. And I whipped those together just with a hand whisk, and then put it on a double boiler over simmering water just to bring it up to like lukewarm, warmer than body temperature, about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. We've talked a little bit about eggs and temperature in the past. That makes it a lot easier to whip up those eggs a lot faster. So you bring them up to about 110 degrees. You throw them in a stand mixer. You let that turn on high for about 3 to 5 minutes, and that mix just like expands a ton in volume, like so much more than you would expect from your like creaming method cakes where you're doing that with butter and sugar. Here you're using those warm eggs and they just like fluff up. Exactly. And then from there, you fold in your dry ingredients. And for me, that included cocoa powder. And then what also makes a Genoese unique is that after you fold it in your dry ingredients, you have some like cooled melted butter. And that gets folded in as well. But it's typically you like mix a little bit of your batter with it to sort of like cut it and then dump that melted butter in, fold that in as well. So the Genoese becomes a lot fattier than like an angel food cake would be, or even maybe a more traditional sponge cake where you would whip the egg whites separately and then like add the egg yolks in later. It just like becomes a little bit more moist, but then it also, because you're using whole eggs and a lot of them, that protein structure is like really secure. So it holds its shape really, really well, and it is nice and spongy. So it's perfect, a light, delicious cake and sponge that can be used in a layer cake, which is exactly what I did with it. It can still dry out a little bit, I noticed, and so it's very typical to use it alongside a soaking syrup, and that's what I would definitely recommend. I noticed that it did not take long at all for it to like get a little bit drier, but the crumb and the texture was so tender and so delicious. Oh my goodness. Even for a chocolate cake, it was wonderful.
Ooh.
I know. Thank you.
That sounds so good.
Exactly. So that's something that like you would use as Genoese, like I said, for a layered cake. Chiffon, angel food cakes are more typical just like on their own, and then maybe served with like cream or fruit on the side. Just because they're so light, their structure can't support so much. And you also have to do this weird thing where you let them dry. If you're doing a traditional cake, I know that you did like a flat sponge, which would have made it this not as necessary. But if you're doing like an actual cake pan or an angel food pan of them, you let them dry upside down, or you let them cool upside down so that their structure doesn't collapse.
Yep, I remember this.
Yep, it's because they're significantly more delicate, so you really don't want to layer them with too much.
The whole idea is that you want to taste the like soft, delicate flavor as opposed to like stacking up other stuff on top of it.
Well, yeah, and
that
also that
sense.
you don't want to just like crush it.
Sure. So
yeah,
light things.
They're not as structurally secure. Yeah, whereas like a traditional butter cake or Victoria sponge, that can hold up to much thicker fillings, fruit, things like that, and hold itself a lot nicer as well. So really depends on what you're using them with. But that's sort of my breakdown on sponges, and also my just like very heartfelt recommendation for everybody to try a Genoese on their own.
I think that's pretty good. Did you look up, this is a weird episode because Dorette made a Alhambra sponge. Did you look into that at all? Did you find anything about that?
I did, and I don't know what
she's talking about, because she says it's a special kind of sponge, but I couldn't find it either.
There is the only thing I could find, and I cannot guarantee that this is what she was talking about, but I'm fairly sure there is this type of cake called an Alhambra cake that is made with a hazelnut chocolate sponge, and then layered with chocolate ganache. But it's still it's a fairly traditional hazelnut chocolate sponge. There's still like eggs being whipped. And that is like not what she was doing. So I still don't know. She was doing
something very strange.
I know,
and
she seemed to like be fairly confident in it and in her technique, even though it did not turn out. And so she seemed to like know what it was, and what I found was not what she was talking about. So I'm still not confident that I know exactly the Alhambra sponge that she was referencing, or it was what I have found and it went
terribly wrong.
Terribly wrong.
Well, that's a shame.
I mean, it does bring us nicely into the Black Forest Gateau. Sorry, Dorette.
It certainly does. No, go for it.
Segueing that way. But I really wanted to get your opinion on the Baker's Bakes. I thought this one was strange in that I'm so used to our showstoppers really being a chance for our bakers to go all out, not only on decoration, but also on flavors. And this episode, everybody really stuck to the traditional Black Forest cake. The weirdest ones we got were stews, in which he used like beetroot, and then he also did a different frosting.
He did Italian meringue, which isn't even that ridiculous of a frosting.
It's unconventional for a Black Forest. And then
because you're supposed to have like a chocolate.
Yeah, and then Flora's was a little bit unique with her pink sponges. But besides that, everybody pretty stuck like pretty much stuck to the original recipe, which I thought was really, really interesting, but also kind of fun. It made it, I guess, easier to compare apples to apples.
I'm actually really glad you mentioned this because I was going to say the same thing, that there was a bunch of cakes that were really kind of just the same cake in a different way, which was weird. I mean, I guess because a Black Forest Gateau is such a specific type of cake, and they weren't necessarily asking for like reinvent the Black Forest Gateau. So you got a lot of the same, just chocolate cake with some kind of like cream and cherries, and that was all you really saw. I have to say that while I've never eaten beetroot or beets before, I think Stu's idea to make a beetroot cake was really interesting, even if it didn't actually work out. I'm sure there's a better way to make it, but
I've actually used beetroot in a red velvet
Really?
cake before. It used to be my sister's favorite thing. It was what she always requested for her birthday was a red velvet cake, but I like colored it all naturally with beets instead of food coloring.
okay.
Okay, I don't love the way that he was doing it, and I feel like I can say this with a little bit of expertise as like a beetroot
Okay.
and cake connoisseur, but rather than grating them the way that he did, I pretty much pureed them. So you cook them all the way done, get rid of all of that texture you don't want to crunch in there, and then you puree it. It does add this really nice earthy flavor. You don't taste beet, but you do get this like moistness throughout the cake. You get a beautiful color, and you get a lovely flavor that backs up and goes really well with chocolate.
I was looking it up, and I've never had beets before, but something on the internet was saying that they taste best with bright, sweet, and fresh flavors, which I feel like cherry is right there. It's
Yeah.
a beautifully bright and fresh flavor that I feel like it could have gone really well, but you're saying just like his approach was kind of weird. He was kind of going for that carrot cake look, which is the kind of similar idea. They're both root vegetables.
Yeah, exactly. Very much more similar to carrot cake than like what I would associate with a sponge for a Black Forest Gateau. That being said, if I wasn't going for such a light filling, like a whipped cream filling in this, like that's a really, really good flavor idea that he used.
I feel really bad because as soon as he mentioned it, Paul was like, "Oh, really? The regular sponge isn't good enough for you?"
I know.
I was like, Paul,
back
this is
off.
what you ask for. You want weird things you've never had before. Why are you being so rude to Stu?
Also, can I just say that I think he has that little moment with Dorette when she's struggling with her Alhambra sponge, just whisking it up and it's not going well. That is the nicest I've ever seen him and will ever seen him. Like, he takes a moment to say, like, don't worry, you've got time. Like, just keep moving, just keep moving. And
That
I
is
was
so
like, I'm
sweet.
sorry, who is this? And what have you done with Paul Hollywood?
What have you done?
It was so interesting. I was like, okay, we
Yeah.
never see this side of you again. This is just like the one moment.
But moving on from Dorette and Stu, I think there were some really interesting cakes in there. I think you mentioned it. Flora's like cherry and chocolate
Yes.
sponges were really pretty. They had that,
Gorgeous.
the kind of naked cake look, which I thought was really, really nice. Naughty did naked side cake too.
Mhm.
I kind of forgot this until the end, but Matt made a chocolate brownie kind of cake, which is they really liked. So evidently it turned out really good. I was kind of shocked that they would have liked such a thick, dense kind of a cake, but it sounds delicious.
Chocolate
You
and
wanna-
any sort of gooey
you-
batter, I mean, really can't go wrong.
I mean, yeah, you want a thick chocolate flavor, so that's pretty cool.
I had
Tamal,
Marie's and Paul's
our good
on
friend
my
Tamal,
list.
made a chocolate collar and a tent.
Oh my gosh,
'cause
yes, so impressive.
He is fearless.
Fearless.
Actually, I thought that Alvin's chocolate and almond cakes was a good idea. I was a little bit turned off by the fact he used gold leaf in such an awful way.
I just didn't
But-
like his design. He just made a bunch of chocolate shards and stuck them on.
Yeah, it was such a boring design.
And they were like, "This looks so pretty," and I was like, "This looks like you stuck a bunch of chocolate shards." And I think that's okay. That's why, and it's so not Alvin's fault. But I think the reason he's probably like my biggest pet peeve of the bakers is that he delivers on flavor. He delivers on flavor. I'm not denying that. But he presents all of these like really kind of messy bakes, and they always go, "Oh, this looks so pretty." And so every single time I'm like, "Mary, no, that doesn't." It like,
Expect better, Mary.
yeah, I don't know. Like, but then they taste amazing apparently. So I really I really would love to try them so that I can maybe shut up and stop judging.
I have to say that similarly, we stand Nadia real hard. We love her to bits. I was kind of shocked because her bake wasn't as pretty as I expected it to be.
Yeah, I think she is one of those bakers that really just like continues to improve throughout the series. And so I think she starts off a little nervous and then just like builds and builds and builds and builds her confidence. And I think you do really see
I
that.
think that's right.
Yeah. So that being said, enough shit talking.
Okay, yes, of course.
If it came down to it, what would you make, and do you think you could do better than Alvin?
I hope I could do better than Alvin. But I will back that up because I made a very good chiffon, and I had this idea like seconds before we started recording. I've talked about this, I think, once or twice before. You've seen vertical cakes, right?
Yeah.
I think it'd be really cool to do a vertical Black Forest Gateau.
Yeah, definitely.
And because you'd get all those beautiful layers in there. And if I used like a chocolate chiffon, which I've tried, I mean, I've made a chiffon before. I could bet I could make one in chocolate. I think that would go really well. I currently love chocolate Swiss meringue buttercream, so you really can't go wrong with that. And one of the bakers did this, and I was a really big fan of this idea, was a chocolate and cherry mousse, which I'm a huge fan of chocolate cherry ice cream. So I think that sounds like a really great idea.
Would you do any sort of liqueur in there, like in place of the Kirsch? Or just
right,
Kirsch?
the Kirsch, yeah.
It's really
That'd
just
be kind
a
of
cherry
weird,
liqueur.
kind of hard because the kind of Kirsch kind of sits on top of each of the layers. I bet you could brush it on before you roll it. That might go well.
Or mix it in with the cream.
I don't really know much about Kirsch, or I don't really know much about other liquors that go in desserts quite yet, so I'm not totally sure what I'd do there. Probably I'd have to go with something traditional, probably.
Yeah, it's basically just like an alcoholic syrup that's flavored is maybe the best way to describe it.
I think that's my idea. I didn't think about what kind of chocolate work I'd want to do. Like I'd want to do something sort of modern, but also something that looks really precise. Like I didn't want to just use like chocolate shards like Alvin did, but like if I could get something that looks really prim and proper and nice.
Maybe
really
a collar would look really nice on to sort of highlight the fact that it's going to be vertical inside too, to almost like have the decoration go around the side
I would be
as well.
Fucking terrified to do a chocolate collar, but that would be really cool. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a good like dream. Like if I could make the best, if I could trust that I make this perfectly, this is what I would make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you did make this. So what did you do?
I did make this, and man, I did it damn near perfectly, I must say. This is another one of those.
It looks freaking amazing.
Thank you. This is going down as a successful bake for sure, and y'all know how high my standards are for myself. So I did a pretty much traditional Black Forest Gateau. Instead of Kirsch, I used Amaretto and really kind of leaned into that almond flavor a little bit more as an accent. And so used Amaretto and almond extract in both my soaking syrup for my sponge, my chocolate Genoese sponge, and then also in the whipped cream as a filling. So I did chocolate Genoese sponge, Amaretto soaking syrup, Amaretto whipped cream frosting, fresh cherries in the middle of each layer, and then topped it all with more of the whipped cream, a cherry chocolate ganache, and then I made like a little forest on top, and I'm very excited about this. I did some cherry jam that I had made the other day, so homemade cherry jam, fresh cherries, and then I tempered ruby chocolate successfully.
Whoa, damn.
And I made little trees, kind of like Flora's, but rather than around the whole cake, I had sort of this like crescent effect going on, and made little trees and flowers out of the chocolate and stuck those in. And I was convinced until I saw it with my own two eyes that it was not tempered. I was like, okay, well, I tried, and I can always like pipe the rest on top, but it was like it set really nicely, and they stayed up for days.
Was this the leftover ruby chocolate from when you made croissants?
Yeah, from when I'd never used it. So the story behind this ruby chocolate, I know the story behind this ruby chocolate is that I bought it to make ruby chocolate or pain au chocolat ruby, whatever I decided to call them, and then they didn't ship in time. And so I made normal pain au chocolat, which were horrible. So I'm kind of glad I didn't waste it on those because those were a big disappointment. But yeah, so I just had some, and I thought that would go really well with the color scheme. And so I looked up the specific temperatures for tempering it. Its sort of temper point was much lower than dark chocolate, so I couldn't sort of do my hack that I did with the dark chocolate where I just like warmed it up but didn't get it past 94 degrees. That really wasn't available to me, so I did have to temper it the hard way, and it worked. I don't know how.
Job.
I really still don't understand how I did it, because then I had to like warm it up a little bit.
I imagine it's kind of like white chocolate. White chocolate has a very weird way to temperate, right?
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of similar. It's higher. It's a lot higher in the like fat in the soy butter, lol, the cocoa butter than it is in the cocoa solids.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe that has something to do with it. But like honestly, after I stirred in all of the like the pieces, to help cool it down, I had to warm it back up to be able to pipe it. And I think I warmed it up too much, but then it was still fine. So
that's pretty good.
I don't know if it was just luck. I don't know if I could recreate that success, but I'm pretty happy with it.
I'd say that's a success. That's a win. Speaking of wins,
I went to this next slide, sorry, and I changed the word Star Baker, but I didn't change it from Nancy to Marie. So I was like, Nancy Star
is
Baker.
Still the Star Baker. She's come back to haunt this season.
Back. No, Marie is our Star Baker, and honestly, she deserved it. Her Black Forest Gateau was gorgeous. I loved those striking trees on top, and then also her Madeira was lovely. I love those really big chunks of candied peel that she put on top. I thought it looked so classic, but really timeless as well.
I think both of her
so
bakes
impressed.
were called perfect.
Yeah, I love her. I was actually reading when I was looking up, I was trying to find pictures of her Madeira cake, and there was like apparently kind of a scandal after she got Star Baker this first time, because apparently she had like 1 week of professional training, and everybody was like, she's not an amateur baker, she's blah 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 blah. But that's like me going to a summer camp and saying that I'm now a professional baker.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I worked in a bagel shop which used frozen bagels, and I don't call myself a baker,
right?
Even though I did work at a bakery.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty much the same.
Exactly. It turns out like they've got pretty specific standards for what quantifies, or I guess what qualifies a amateur baker versus a professional baker, and it's basically just that. Like, if as long as you don't work full time as a baker and haven't gotten a degree in it, then you're good to go, which makes sense.
I was very, very proud of Marie. She was like so close to crying, I think, a couple times, and I was like so proud.
I love her.
Speaking of things that people were upset about, let's give a hats off to Stu Henshaw. We definitely supported him in his interesting decisions, but he has gone on to do quite a lot post Bake Off, I gotta say. You can find Stu at The Alt Kitchen on Facebook, Insta, and Twitter, where he makes vegetarian and vegan recipes.
What?
And does a lot of consultation.
What? Let me go follow him right now.
Yeah. He's been baking since he was young because his parents owned a restaurant, evidently. He has the website, thealternatekitchen.net, a comprehensive plant-based food hub and consultancy website. From one of his various bios I found, Stu runs exclusive sellout supper clubs throughout the UK, offers bespoke catering, guest teaches at various prestigious cookery schools, and works as a food and beverage consultant developing holistic plant-based food for a company called Cloud 12, and they're specifically their brasserie. He's their food and beverage consultant. And Cloud 12 is a one-of-a-kind wellness and lifestyle club in the heart of Notting Hill, extending over 3 floors with an interactive play and learn zone for families with children, an indulgent spa, a luxury salon, nutritionally focused brasserie, and a holistic wellness center, all under one roof for you to enjoy. It's a wild company.
I'm obsessed.
It's a very pretty company.
Way to
but
go,
he's gone,
Stu.
He's doing really well. The one thing I gotta say is you can go to his website and see his rather strange blog post about his decision to go vegan. He calls it V-Day. And he makes a weird joke where he's like, I've decided to go all plant-based. Oh, come on, Stu. Just say it. It's vegan. And you're like, you're vegan. You're not that weird. But okay, Stu, sure. He also lists his reasons for going vegan as animal welfare, for personal health reasons, being more eco-conscious, and then he also lists Cowspiracy, that documentary.
Yeah, that made my mom go vegan. So,
but it's just a kind of weird post. But other than that, his website's pretty stunning, and he does so much work recently, which is actually kind of cool that we've done this episode kind of at this point. On August 7th, he posted he got hired as a senior development chef for Corn and Cauldron, 2 vegetarian vegan companies in the UK.
Awesome. Wow.
So congrats,
I love
Stu.
a good plant-based chef and plant-based recipes. So that's super exciting. I had no idea. I really hadn't followed up much with him. So that's so cool.
That's really cool. I do gotta say there are some hilarious posts about Stu leaving Bake Off. From The Independent, they write, Stu runs his own food blog, aptly named The Alternative Kitchen, where he posts about his passion for Middle Eastern and Mediterranean food, feuds with English, and also brews his own beer. Of course he does. So people were very upset about having this like hipster guy on Bake Off.
I don't get why.
I have to read some of these tweets because they made me so happy. One person said, Stu looks like he's auditioning for The Voice. Another said, can't believe we don't get to drool over Stu's buns for the rest of Bake Off. Or Stu himself posted, people have either been totally lovely or just plain hilarious. Twat in a hat and Great British Jerk Off are my current favorites.
Oh my God.
People were so angry
Oh my
about this hipster
God.
on Bake Off. It's really quite
And he
funny.
didn't even do that bad. Like, I mean, somebody's
wasn't
got to go
terrible,
home
but, like,
first, you know?
People were just angry about the fact he was a
Wow,
vegan.
what a bunch of meanies. Okay, listen, we did just like spend like a good 60 seconds trashing Alvin's bakes, like the way they look though. So like maybe we can't talk, but I do like
We can't
at the end of
really.
the day, like I do love Alvin, and I think he's a good
Yeah.
baker. I just
Yeah. They're all good bakers. They beat out, thousands of people to get on the show.
I would not
And
stand a
there's a
chance
reason
against
Stu
any
is
of
on the
them.
show. It's because every recipe has to be unique and interesting, and he had weird kind of out there ideas for his bakes. That's why he's got on the show. It's unfortunate they didn't work out super well.
But it sounds like that's also the thing that's like made him so successful now, you know?
Exactly. I think he became vegan after the show because, he baked like 6 different cakes that were full of butter and stuff. But I think it helped him get there of realizing that he wanted to be, a little more conscious about what he does.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Wow. Obsessed. Well,
Hats off, Stu.
hats off, Stu. Congratulations. Your new job. Hooray. That brings us to the end of our episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. Next episode should be Arlette of fun. It's Biscuit Week. And there's Arlette.
Yes.
If you were wondering. If you've
I
enjoyed,
couldn't tell.
I know. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, please tell your friends and family to check us out on social media or subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. Every subscription and download helps us out tons.
You can find everything you need to know about our show, including links to social media, podcasting apps, and our new merch shop on our website, hatsofftobake.com.
The links that we use to make our Madeira and our Black Forest Gateau are posted on our website. You can find them by navigating to episodes and then find the post for this episode to try the recipe out for yourself. If you do make it, let us know how it went. We loved both of these bakes and we would definitely recommend you try them out.
I'm probably making my Madeira cake again this week, so do it.
Oh, yum. Yeah, my Black Forest Gateau is like, it is gone. I baked it 2 days ago. It was a 3-tier cake, just demolished.
Love it. I'd also like to give a hats off to Peter Lalish, who wrote our intro and our outro music. You can find Peter on Fiverr as PW Lalish, as well as on Bandcamp under the name AKLF. As Ugne says, hopefully it'll taste good and my crack will show. On your marks.
Get set, bake.
I'm ready to go whenever you are.
Okay, perfect.
Oh crap!
Let
No,
me
wait, I'm
open it.
not.
Oh,
Oh no, Mallory! I've forgotten a whole section of what we do
What?
in this fucking show that we run.
What section?
I forgot to think of
Of what
a
you would make?
gâteau. A gâteau I would make.
Oh, yeah.
Has it been that long? It hasn't. It's only been a month or two since we
It's
did
fine.
an actual
I know it's gonna.
proper
I was thinking of
podcast.
that earlier. Because I wouldn't have done that except for I was like staring at this slideshow while I was making it. I was like, oh yeah.
What would I do?
I promise I thought of a different Madeira flavor. I didn't just cheat and do what I did last time.
Oh, actually, I have a great idea for this. What are they called? I guess it's just called a vertical. Okay.
September.
It was the 19th of September, 1942. I don't know why I picked that year, but okay. It just came. We're gonna cut that part from the podcast.
Okay.
Anyway, it's late. No, it's not. It's 8:30. What am I saying?
It's, you know.
And that is our time for tea.
Thank you, Nick. It's just, we'll figure it out. I'll make you cut that horrendous mixture.
Let's
It's
pretend that
fine.
didn't happen.
It wouldn't be a hot bow episode without it.